Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm a social studies educator, historian, and host of this, the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I'm also an avid collector of popular culture artifacts. I love what I find at thrift store outlets, garage sale leftovers, and what I spot just making my way around the built world. I enjoy sorting through boxes of free books and magazines, not to mention online collections like Internet Archive, and of course the Library of Congress. But you don't need to spend your time digging through bins or following online rabbit holes to get a look into the past. The movies and TV we watch, the books we read, and the games we play are all documents of the past. So is fashion, food, music, toys, even the roads we travel on and the places we live and work in. Everything is a primary source. This podcast is the result of exhibiting these kinds of artifacts in public, getting passersby to select an item they connect with, and then chatting with me to see what it says about the time, place, and people who made it. The conversation you are about to hear, therefore, is your history, my history, our history, through popular culture. So, Kathy, you are a ephemerist. Is that a word? Is ephemerist a term?
Also a delgeologist, which is a postcard collector.
I love that so much. And I've been a postcard collector. I like when I find big stashes of them. You know, like
So much fun.
I'll go to the antique stores or collector stores and buy individual postcards if I really like the image and what it is. But there's nothing better than finding just like a dump of them and just sorting through. And what is it about postcards that draws you in?
What traces back once again to my childhood. When I was very young, throughout my childhood and teenage years, my grandparents had a home up in New Hampshire on a lake with a big barn, and we used to go up there on the weekends. So on rainy days, I would go into the barn, and my grandfather had big stashes of postcards and photographs and sheet music, and he had a full set of Fortune magazines. He had all kinds of ephemera in there, and that's what I would do on rainy days. I'd be in that barn looking at stuff.
It's like connecting with somebody that you may never have a reason to meet, or even just a group of people, connecting with them through the materials that they had. And thank goodness he kept those things, otherwise...
Well, I found a postcard that he had sent to his wife, my grandmother, 2 years before they got married. He had sent her a picture of himself from Plattsburgh, New York.
My parents live in Plattsburgh. I grew up in Plattsburgh.
Really?
Yeah. I live in New Hampshire now, but...
Oh, what connection.
Yeah, I know. What part of New Hampshire was the house in?
Webster Lake, right in the Lakes District,
Yeah.
right at sort of at the foot of, right off Route 93.
Okay, yeah, I live in Milton, New Hampshire, which is on the border with Maine. It's kind of where the Seacoast region turns into the Lakes region.
Yeah.
And but my dad was in the Air Force, so that's why we were in New Hampshire in the 80s, and then we moved to Plattsburgh when the base closed.
When did you live in Plattsburgh?
My parents are still there, but we moved there in 90.
Because I did the grand opening for the theater there.
Really? The
Hoyt
Strand?
Cinemas.
Oh, the Hoyts, yeah.
I did the grand opening.
Really?
I did the whole, because I used to do PR.
Oh, that's so fantastic. I think it was already open by the time we got there, but I probably somewhere in my collection are a bunch of tickets from that exact Hoyts.
I have pictures.
That's so
'Cause I took
At
pictures
Champlain
of-
Centers North, yeah. At the mall there.
When it first opened.
The Pyramid Mall, yeah.
That's right. Because that's not what this podcast is
No,
about.
I mean, this is the nature of it, though. We can go in
Yeah.
any direction, really. But that's an incredible...
Synergy.
Right, yeah. And I was just talking off the air with somebody earlier about Plattsburgh because, since I've kind of redirected the way that I see artifacts of the past and things like that, I mean, the base there alone is a great primary source. The barracks that they have and everything. And there's a small lunch counter just outside the old base called the Campus Lunch Restaurant or something. It has
It's still
one of
there.
those beautiful neon signs, green backed and it says Campus.
Wow.
But I was talking about it with my dad, and I was like, isn't it kind of weird that Because there is a college campus in Plattsburgh. There's a SUNY school, but it's on the other side of town. I'm like, why would they call this the campus lunch counter if... Well, that's because after World War II, and before it was revamped into an Air Force base, the old barracks were turned into a college called Champlain College, and it was for the GIs, for the GI Bill receiving veterans to go and get their schooling. So that was actually the campus, and it made perfect sense. And that sign would be correct to that time period, late 40s, early 50s. And it's things like that. Like, I must have driven past that. I took my driving test in that neighborhood, and so I've driven past it how many times and never made that connection that that's an artifact of... And I have a postcard of the college, actually, somewhere in my collection.
Oh, that's a real treasure.
So the one that you picked out, though, was, or is, from Las Vegas. And I have to ask, what do you prefer when you find a postcard? One that's already been filled out or a blank one?
Well, I don't know. It's a toss-up, because if you find a great postcard and it also has a great message, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Are you going to scan the message? What I do is I put it into a separate book that just has messages. Because otherwise, I once found a postcard with a message about Ku Klux Klan march in Massachusetts. But then it had a great picture on it, and I turned it over and I lost track of the message, so God only knows where it is now. I have tens of thousands of postcards, so it could be anywhere.
It's one of those statements that sometimes history is uncomfortable.
Yeah, or I could have sold it. But this postcard is pretty amazing, because this is what's called a chrome. This is the most recent type of... It started out back at the turn of the 20th century with undivided postcards, so that you couldn't even write a message on it, because it was the first time you could ever send a picture through the mail for turn of the 20th century. So for several years, things just kind of went along, and then in 1908, they decided to have a divided postcard so that people could write a message, and then things really took off. And in 1 year, the year of 1908, something like 9 million postcards were printed by just one publisher.
Wow.
I learned that statistic in a Zoom meeting of a postcard club that had a presentation by a woman who's carefully studied one of the large postcard companies, Detroit Publishing.
That's interesting, because you would think that... I think the general consensus is that postcards likely, kind of rose to prominence alongside car travel, because people were traveling more on the highways, but that's well before cars became super popular.
Well, what became popular during that time is, like Route 66, diners, that whole culture. That was like the 30s and the 40s. That's what people collect now. They're called linen postcards. They have bright colors and they have a linen texture. So that's a particular category of postcard. This is later. This is a chrome. So this is more like the 1960s or the 50s even.
Yeah.
But the ones I have mostly not of Las Vegas. I do have them from like the 30s, but they look completely different from this. Because the people are wearing, the signs are different. The layout of the street is different. The dress of the people is different. So it's going to be fun to compare it. Because I usually don't buy postcards as new as this. Most of the postcards I buy are turn of the century. But they didn't have any postcards of Las Vegas at the turn of the century because it wasn't there.
Yeah, it was a ragtown that...
So I have to have something to compare it to, because all I have is mid-century ones.
It's remarkable. What we've already talked about are smaller representations or local representations of cause and effect of things that happen larger, right? So the reason that we, as my family, moved from Portsmouth, New Hampshire to Plattsburgh, New York, was because the Cold War was coming to a close, and these northern tier bases were not as necessary anymore when the threat of a Soviet attack or whatever, or responding to something.
So they moved people sort of inland.
Right. Well, because the idea was all these bases, Air Force bases in particular, they're called SAC bases, Strategic Air Command, and they placed a lot of them along the northern part of the country so that they could respond over the polar ice cap, and they'd be therefore closer to the Soviet Union. But once the Cold War was petering out and ended, they started closing bases down. And so we were and all of my friends and everybody at the base in New Hampshire were, kind of, I don't want to say victims of it, but what resulted is we had to move. And so same kind of thing with this. I have also in the collection over here a Hoover Dam it's a postcard book, like a little miniature thing. That was a huge project for the federal government. They funded that project to tame the water and create a reservoir, create hydroelectricity for the Southwest. And they brought in, at least at first, primarily, mostly young bachelors to do the work. Did you know that Everything is a Primary Source now has a series of short videos which, like the podcast, teach social studies concepts through popular culture? Check out the Everything is a Primary Source Finds playlist on YouTube for quick overviews of the artifacts I uncover at Goodwill outlets, pick up from the side of the road, or resurrect from my youth, because I don't throw much out. These are great class starters for teachers, and because each clip ends with citation, they're great for students too. Furthermore, EPS Finds episodes become the starting point for the open source Everything's a Primary Source project, which encourages you and your students, if you have some, to add to the conversation. Or you can just enjoy them as you would any one of the other billions of clips on YouTube. It's up to you. Go to YouTube and become a subscriber to the Everything's a Primary Source channel today. Now, back to the conversation. And coincidentally, the day after the same week that the contract was approved, I think it was called the 5 companies or 7 companies, to start the Hoover Dam, Nevada's legislature passed the legalization of gambling. And so they would take their pay on the weekend and immediately just go up the road to Las Vegas.
Approximately what year was that?
So this would be late 20s, I think the 30, around there, early 1930s.
The year Las Vegas really was founded was when?
Because it was a little tiny town. There was a town on the map called Las Vegas before the Hoover Dam project.
I don't know whether it was some gangster that went there.
Yeah, because that was, once it started...
That's what I heard.
Because, the Boulder City was a result of the Hoover Dam.
Right.
Or Boulder Dam. And coincidentally, that was government housing. It looked a lot like the base housing that I grew up on. It was like one of the first real attempts at so when families started to move in there, they started building a community and everything. And I think by that point, by the end of the 30s into the 40s, Vegas and that whole region had started to really build up into a society. And I think that's when the gangsters moved in. Because gambling and gangsters kind of go hand to hand, don't they? It's kind of the same thing.
They sort of launched the whole thing.
Right. Like the Vegas that we're seeing here is their Vegas, right? You said that you don't usually get an image like this with all of the kind of like a valley of neon.
Because it's a chrome. It's a later postcard. They're very colorful. They're shiny. That's the kind of postcard you see now. But most of the postcards I collect are earlier because they're documenting things that were not that well documented. These postcards, large numbers of them that were sold, so they're pretty plentiful.
Is it because of what they could do with the colors in the chrome style postcards? Is that why we have a daytime shot of Vegas in there? Because you would think that Vegas is kind of known for its nightlife. It's bright neon signs.
That's another thing about this postcard. Most of the postcards I have of Vegas show it at night, and this one is a daytime scene. So
I have a few that came from the same collection. This one I've had for years. I got it at a Salvation Army. There's a plastic bag full of postcards, and it was, I would say, like heavy in Vegas and heavy in Seattle. Like that was like the 2 locations that it had most representation of. And a few others from the same series, same time period, are Las Vegas in the daytime. And I'm curious if, given the era, 60s, if they were trying to make it more appealing to a more normal, maybe even, I don't want to say family, but I mean, the photo just shows kind of...
Yeah, I think what they're doing is this is an image piece they're trying to presented as almost more of a wholesome family,
Yeah.
Disney-esque experience as opposed to some, you know. But then back in the 80s, it got back to what happens in Vegas
Right,
stays
they
in
started
Vegas.
to-
But that was much later.
An adult playground, you know.
And
not-
then they had to regroup again to try to make it family-friendly again after that.
That's a hard thing to. You have a background in PR, right, in public relations and everything. That must be a hard thing to do, because the buildings, the signage, everything Las Vegas, those aren't easy to revamp.
Well, it's a rebranding, but it also involved creation of a lot of new buildings. I really don't know that much about Las Vegas. I was there before that all happened. I was there at this time, which is maybe one of the reasons that this appeals to me. I was there in the 1960s with my parents to a convention, and I actually won $500 in the slot machines. It was
Nice.
very exciting.
Yeah. That would keep you coming back, right?
It was a lot of money back then. And in
It's a
quarters,
lot of money now,
they gave
I
me a
take it.
big popcorn box, and the quarters are all flowing into it, so that was cool.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the imagery that I think they like to keep that alive, right? They like the idea of, you know, somebody striking it rich on their first pull of the slot machine instead of being there all night, 2 a.m. still, popping the quarters in.
Right.
And, and I think that's the message that's trying to be sent in this image of, yeah, we got casinos, but it's also...
There's other stuff here, too.
Yeah,
You can go
there's restaurants
shopping,
and
go out to dinner.
and
Sure.
shows, see a show. That seems to be the Vegas of now.
This is more of a family-friendly.
Yeah. Over there, I don't know if you can reach it. Do you see that black piece just towards on the right-hand side? That's an Elvis Presley
I saw that, yeah.
menu.
Oh, it's a menu?
A souvenir menu from his Las Vegas show.
Oh, isn't that something?
And I did a podcast with a gentleman on this not long ago, and we identified how they're trying to present it as fine dining, which first of all doesn't really match up with Elvis. You're seeing this guy who's known for his deep fried banana and sandwiches and peanut butter sandwiches and stuff, and they have oysters and
Baked lobster tail, international. That's not, that doesn't fit, but... So
it's
I think that the International Hotel probably produced this to promote.
yeah.
If the Elvis people had done this, they wouldn't have.
Yeah, it would have, and it sets a scene of a fun an image of going to see Elvis, sitting at a nice table and having dinner service before the show, and
Well, they're using the image of Elvis to be able to charge really high prices
Yeah.
for things like lobster.
and he's maybe the picture that we have on the cover is him reading off the specials for the night. We got a lobster tail, man.
That's a nice graphic, though, on the cover there. I like that.
It's that one's been with me for a while. I was
I can see
given that
why.
for my school librarian. Sometimes would feed me some old ephemera
Nice.
and stuff that she knows I like it so much, and that one has been a treasured copy for a long time. But it represents, I think, the same kind of Las Vegas that this card does, which is. Because by 71, Elvis had been reinvented at least twice. He was a resident artist, and for a while it seemed like that was kind of like the place where your career would go to die.
That's a good point, and I've thought about that often. Now you've got people, Vegas is able to allow somebody that, like Cher, for example, whose career might have been stalled, to come back and
Yeah.
be really back in the zeitgeist.
And
all these stars that were previously, their careers were sort of in limbo, and
Yeah.
now Vegas has brought them back to life.
And in a weird way, it's almost meeting its destiny, because what we started talking about before, the Hoover Dam, was put in to revitalize or actually add vitality to the Southwest, Los Angeles in particular, and now Las Vegas is almost like an extension of LA, at least the showbiz side of it, where that's where you go for. Have you ever seen a show on? I think it's on Showtime called Hacks.
I've heard of it. I'm not a TV.
It's so
watcher.
much fun. It's such a good show. It's
Yeah.
Gene Smart plays a kind of a Joan Rivers style comedian whose career is being a resident in a Las Vegas hotel, and she's been doing it for so long that the jokes are just, she can recite them in her sleep kind of thing. And to revitalize her career, they hire a young, Zoomer to be her writer, and they have hijinks and culture clashes and stuff like that. But they Las Vegas is such an important, it's almost like a character in the show, and they not just the setting, and it really reinforces that idea of this Las Vegas of the 60s and 70s is on its way out. The new Las Vegas of, it's not a step down, it's actually, and she uses it as a training ground, right? She kind of tests her material out in Vegas so that she can return to prominence and be a known name. So maybe I should take this podcast to Las Vegas and see how I do.
There you go.
Have a residency. People just watch me talk to people on the stage.
Well, there's actually a postcard dealer in Las Vegas who's a friend of mine.
Really?
And he's got great postcards. So
I bet he
go out
does.
There.
I'm interested in Las Vegas, but I'm not a gambler at all, so I wouldn't have much. But it seems like there's more to do in Las Vegas than just gambling these days.
Shopping, dining, all that.
Museums.
I mean, I haven't been there, but
I think they have a neon museum there.
Well, I know people I've talked to people who've flown out there for a vacation because it's very inexpensive. The fares are inexpensive. The hotels are inexpensive.
Yeah.
And it's warm, and there's pools, and so.
And they comp you everything.
Yeah, it's more affordable than a lot of other warm weather vacations.
They call it America's Playground, right? Is that still the? Well, maybe I'll add it to my list and see what happens. Thank you so much for joining me on this.
Thank you so much.
This is a lot of fun. Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything is a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.